Just weeks ago, new food safety reports shook the country after independent labs discovered toxic heavy metals hiding inside everyday chocolate bars sold in grocery stores from coast to coast. Not imported knockoffs, not obscure brands. These are the same ones filling Halloween Bowls office desks and lunch bags across America right now. Tests revealed traces of lead and cadmium high enough to alarm toxicologists. Yet these bars still sit on store shelves with smiling labels and promises of pure quality. Meanwhile, regulators remain caught in red tape and corporate lobbyists quietly bend the rules meant to protect us. The result is a perfect storm where profit outweighs safety and consumers become the experiment. If something this dangerous can slip through the cracks of billion-dollar companies and government oversight, what else are we blindly trusting? Stay until the end because in this video, we'll uncover 7 beloved chocolate brands that might not be as innocent as they look. And the truth behind them will make you question every sweet bite. Number 1, Hershey's. When the name Hershey's appears on a wrapper, most Americans see comfort, nostalgia, childhood. Few realize that behind that sweetness lies one of the most disturbing safety controversies of the past few years. Consumer tests from independent labs revealed that certain Hershey's dark chocolate bars contain measurable levels of lead and cadmium metals linked to kidney damage and developmental issues when consumed regularly. The levels didn't come from rumor. They came from certified lab data numbers that regulators quietly filed away while the company continued to fill store aisles from Pennsylvania to California. What makes this story unsettling is not just the contamination itself, but how smoothly it slid through every checkpoint of our food system. Hershey's products are inspected, approved, and distributed by the largest supply network in North America. These are factories that claim world-class safety standards, and yet toxic metals made it all the way into products millions eat daily. That gap between promise and reality is where trust collapses. The average shopper can read every label and still never see the truth that hides in the fine print of regulation thresholds written decades ago. The company's public line has been consistent: everything meets government safety requirements. But those limits are set by agencies overwhelmed by lobbying, by policy debates about acceptable daily exposure, by studies that shift the definition of danger depending on who funds them. Hershey's doesn't need to break the law to stay profitable. It only needs to obey a system that moves the goalposts. When the profit margins of billion-dollar corporations depend on the price of cocoa sourced from mines contaminated by industrial waste, safety becomes a sliding scale. Independent consumer advocates have been raising alarm since 2023, urging shoppers to moderate their dark chocolate intake, especially from brands with higher cocoa percentages. Yet the market keeps growing, advertisements keep promising antioxidant health benefits, and the truth stays buried under glossy packaging. Hershey's marketing division still positions its dark bars as a better indulgence. What most people don't realize is that the darker the chocolate, the higher the concentration of metals absorbed from soil during cultivation. It's chemistry turned commerce, and few regulators want to touch it. Some states like California adopted stricter benchmarks through Proposition 65, forcing companies to warn consumers if their products exceed microgram limits. The result: many brands quietly adjusted recipes, reduced serving sizes, or simply added disclaimers in small print. Hershey's, however, fought back against the idea of labeling, arguing that it would cause unnecessary confusion. Confusion is convenient when awareness threatens profit. The line between compliance and concealment grows thinner every year. Behind the corporate walls, another issue shadows the brand traceability of its cocoa supply. Investigations from international watchdogs revealed that Hershey's, along with other chocolate giants, still struggles to guarantee that its cocoa is free from child labor or forced labor practices. The same lack of transparency that hides exploitation also hides contamination. When raw materials come from unmonitored regions, metals like lead and cadmium slip in unnoticed. It isn't malice, it's indifference scaled into a business model. And while media headlines fade, the long-term consequences linger. Lead accumulates slowly in the bloodstream. Cadmium builds up in kidneys over time. For a healthy adult, the effects are invisible at first: a little fatigue, a dull headache, maybe nothing at all. For children or pregnant women, those traces can alter development forever. Yet the bars stay on shelves, the commercials keep running, and the burden shifts silently onto consumers who trust that American-made still means safe. The question isn't why Hershey's failed. It's how the entire structure allows such failure to be called success. A company this massive doesn't just sell candy. It shapes policy funds, research influences nutrition guidelines, and defines what the public believes is harmless. Each time regulators raise the allowable limits, the system congratulates itself for progress. Meanwhile, the lead remains in the chocolate. People often say if it were truly dangerous, the government would recall it. But recalls rarely happen for metals. They're invisible, tasteless, and cumulative. They don't cause instant illness that triggers investigation. They just stay slowly doing their work while headlines move on to the next crisis. Think about how deep this rabbit hole goes. A bar of chocolate, once a symbol of comfort, now sits at the intersection of trade politics, environmental decay, and consumer manipulation. From contaminated soils in West Africa to the spotless aisles of American supermarkets, the path of that sweetness tells a darker story about what happens when accountability becomes optional. So before unwrapping your next guilt-free indulgence, pause and remember, even the most trusted name can hide its own poison. Hershey's is not an isolated case. It's a mirror reflecting how easily safety can be sold, how quietly trust can be bought, and how far corporations will go before someone finally says enough. Number 2, Lindt. The moment you taste a Lindt truffle or unwrap that sleek golden foil, you might believe you've reached the pinnacle of chocolate luxury. But beneath that glossy shine, something darker may be lurking. Legal filings reveal that Lindt is currently defending itself against allegations that its premium dark chocolates contain elevated levels of lead and cadmium contaminants that should never grace any luxury treat. The company has repeatedly been accused of overstating its purity claims while quietly undermining its own marketing promises. Internal documents show that Lindt once licensed language like expertly crafted with the finest ingredients and Swiss heritage, branding its chocolate as an artisanal luxury. Yet in court filings, they conceded that those claims may not reflect the reality behind their supply chain. That admission doesn't just raise questions about one wrapper, it shakes the foundation of consumer trust. When a brand built on image is forced to retract its own story, the doubts begin to creep in. What else have they softened, watered down, or hidden? The numbers aren't small. Independent test results circulated among consumer rights groups suggest that some Lindt bars crossed safety thresholds levels that health advocates say should demand warning labels, not glossy magazines. But public recalls nearly none. Regulatory agencies remain slow, distracted by ever-shifting standards, and reluctant to challenge a global name. Meanwhile, Lindt continues to sell its dark lines as cleaner indulgence, leveraging its prestige to shield scrutiny. Chillingly, the deeper you dig, the more you find that Lindt's issues extend beyond metal content. Its supply chain is vast and opaque: cocoa beans sourced from West Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, with variable oversight. Reports from investigative NGOs have flagged some of Lindt's suppliers for failing to disclose critical soil assessments, or for not demonstrating rigorous contamination testing. In effect, Lindt sells you an image more than a guarantee, an illusion that luxury equals safety. The industry's weakest link might be the very legislation meant to protect you. In places where permissible exposure levels are loosely defined or rarely enforced, corporations can claim legal compliance even as they push boundaries. Lindt's defense leans hard on legal fine print. Yes, our bars are within federal limits, they assert, so we're safe. But those limits were drawn decades ago, often influenced by industry lobbying or outdated research. Under that scheme, a chocolate bar can legally carry cancer-linked contaminants and still fly off shelves in gleaming boxes. For viewers who already monitor their diet, who worry about brain health or kidney function, or who try to protect children and loved ones, this should hit harder than any sweet temptation ever could. Lindt's slip doesn't just affect indulgence. It questions whether premium still means anything real in a world where regulatory inertia is the default. So what do you do when one of the world's most trusted names is tangled in uncertainty? You pivot to brands that publish third-party lab results, that commit to transparency, not just marketing poetry. Seek out chocolatiers that openly share heavy metal assays that list supplier tests from source farms. Opt for bars with clear traceability, smaller scale producers who have nothing to hide. For example, brands like Endangered Species and Alter Eco have publicly shared lab data bypassing the smoke and mirrors. Choose the ones that refuse to rely on prestige to shield their secrets. If Lindt's legal defense relies on silence, yours must demand disclosure. Let your next chocolate purchase be a vote not just in flavor, but in accountability. Don't let your sweet moments be the quiet stage for toxicity. Number 3, Theo Chocolate. You walk into a Whole Foods spot, the Theo bar, and think finally a chocolate that does things right. Organic, fair trade, made in the US. The kind of product that makes you feel good about spending more. But here's the twist that most shoppers never see coming. Those glossy labels may be hiding a far darker truth than anyone imagined. In recent lab tests reviewed by consumer safety groups, Theo Chocolate's dark bars were found to contain levels of lead and cadmium that should have triggered mandatory warnings in states like California. Not a trace here and there, not a technicality, these bars tested at more than 100% over the allowable limit for lead and nearly double for cadmium. These numbers don't just blur the line between safe and unsafe, they erase it. And while some might argue these limits are just guidelines, heavy metals don't negotiate. They accumulate in your blood, in your brain, in your children. Theo's public stance is familiar, their products meet federal safety standards, their testing is within norms. But the cracks show quickly. Their process relies on representative testing, a loophole big enough for risk to walk right through. Not every batch gets tested. Not every source is tracked with the level of scrutiny you'd expect from a brand that leans so hard on trust and transparency. And when the numbers came out, Theo didn't issue recalls, didn't pull products, didn't even notify the retailers selling them. This isn't just about one brand. This is about how easily ethical becomes a shield. A way to deflect questions, buy time, and smooth over real danger with marketing poetry. The deeper issue lies in how the system allows this. Federal agencies have no binding limits for heavy metals in chocolate. State-level protections like California's Proposition 65 are among the few firewalls that remain, and even those can be dodged through legal arguments about dosage and serving size. Brands like Theo operate in that vacuum, legally protected, publicly praised, silently risky, and the illusion gets deeper. Theo has built a reputation not just on purity, but on moral superiority, fair labor, sustainable farming, community impact. But multiple investigative reviews have raised red flags about traceability in their sourcing regions. When cacao comes from areas with known soil contamination and lacking environmental oversight, heavy metals don't need an invitation, they're already baked into the process. No amount of feel-good branding can scrub that away. Now here's where the damage becomes personal. For those living with chronic illness, those managing kidney function, those with kids or grandkids, these aren't abstract dangers. This is daily exposure that builds quietly, invisibly, until it becomes irreversible. The worst part, most people would never suspect it from a bar that costs nearly $5 and markets itself as the gold standard in ethics. So, what's the better move? Shift your loyalty toward brands that don't just say the right words, but prove them batch by batch, report by report. Names like Theo Chocolate, which stone grinds its beans and publishes test results openly, or select dark bars from Ghirardelli, which in some tests have fallen below warning thresholds. Look for transparency, not gloss. Pick companies small enough to still care or big enough to be held accountable, nothing in between. Because if even a brand like Theo, built on the promise of doing better, can quietly allow this kind of exposure, then what hope is there for the rest? In the end, it's not about trusting the label. It's about asking who wrote it, who verified it, and who benefits from your belief. Coming up next, a legacy luxury brand whose image is polished like gold foil, but what's hiding inside may leave a bitter taste that's hard to forget. Number 4, Godiva. You pick up a Godiva dark chocolate bar wrapped in gold, stamped with the words Belgium 1926, and feel like you're holding a piece of edible luxury. But behind that shine lies a truth most consumers are never told. Independent tests reveal that certain Godiva bars contain lead levels that exceed what some states classify as safe exposure by more than 140% per ounce. Not just a trace, not just a margin. Enough to raise legal red flags. Legal filings now accuse Godiva of selling chocolate with unsafe levels of heavy metals without providing any warning to consumers. Think about that. A product marketed as refined, elegant, and high-end may quietly expose its loyal buyers to lead. And when the label says nothing, no alert, no dosage information, you're left completely in the dark, assuming safety because the brand feels premium. But the truth is, Godiva's reputation rests on illusion. Multiple lawsuits have already challenged its Belgian-made identity, forcing the company to pay out millions after consumers learned that many of its chocolates are actually manufactured in the United States and elsewhere, not in Belgium. That carefully curated image of heritage and craftsmanship, its branding, its marketing, it's not a promise of purity. And when it comes to safety, Godiva, like many in the industry, leans on legal thresholds, those loose federal guidelines that don't reflect the risks for older adults, for children, for people with chronic illness. There are no nationwide rules on how much lead or cadmium can legally be in chocolate. So long as a product skirts under outdated averages or ambiguous standards, it's considered compliant. But compliance doesn't mean clean. It just means quiet enough to keep selling. The deeper you go, the more the cracks appear. Godiva's cocoa sources come from broad international supply lines, many of which lack strict environmental controls. Soil in cocoa-growing regions can be contaminated naturally, or through decades of mining and poor regulation. Without clear transparency at the farming level, there's no real way to verify if those beans were safe, or if what you're biting into is a sweet disguise for systemic failure. And that's the cost of luxury, isn't it? You pay for the branding, the box, the illusion of quality. But inside, the risks are no different, maybe even worse than the cheapest bar on the shelf. Because the money goes to the marketing, not the monitoring. When brands like Godiva get to decide how much they tell you, the result isn't protection, it's manipulation. For people living on fixed incomes, already navigating chronic health concerns, or trying to protect their families, this isn't just about chocolate, it's about trust. And that trust gets broken the moment safety becomes optional. Coming up next, a name that sells itself as smooth and silky comfort. But once the wrapping peels away, the bitter aftertaste might linger far longer than expected. Number 5, Dove. You pick up a Dove Promises Deeper Dark Chocolate bar drawn in by its smooth wrapper, and that promise of deeper flavor, and feel like you're choosing something safe, something indulgent. But hidden behind that familiar name is a class action filing with claims that this very product contains unsafe levels of lead and cadmium. Documents in the lawsuit assert that in just 1 ounce, the Dove Dark Chocolate exceeds California's allowable limit for cadmium by over 112%, and shows a significant level of lead as well. That's not a small discrepancy. That's over the line. The lawsuit contends that Mars, maker of Dove, failed to warn consumers and allowed the product to be sold without adequate testing or disclosure. The label presents a chocolate that feels premium, but the reality may be toxic. Many consumers aren't told of these risks they buy, trusting the brand, assuming safety because the name is recognizable. What they get might be exposure to heavy metals masked by marketing. Dove's defense will likely lean on compliance. They'll say the product meets federal thresholds. But those thresholds are weak, negotiated long ago, rarely enforced stringently. They're not designed for vulnerable groups, children, people with kidney stress, or those already exposed to toxins. Compliance does not equal clean. Under those rules, a chocolate bar can legally carry harmful contaminants and still sit on shelves under luxury packaging. What's more, Dove's supply chain, like many in the chocolate trade, is opaque. Cocoa beans may be sourced from farms in regions with contaminated soil, inadequate environmental protections, or weak oversight. Without accountability at that level, heavy metals slip through the cracks. The farther removed the brand is from the farm, the more layers mask the risk. And when distribution centers, shippers, and blending facilities add even small contamination, your bar becomes a vessel for hidden danger. In the broader system, this case illustrates how name brands use scale and brand trust to diffuse scrutiny. It's easier to approve a Dove bar than investigate every cocoa lot. Regulators are too underfunded, too bound by industry lobbying, too slow to catch up with modern testing methods. Meanwhile, consumers who aren't scientists or lawyers have no way to verify what's in their chocolate, especially when risks like heavy metals are invisible, cumulative, and long-term. For people managing chronic health conditions for older adults or families with young children, this isn't laxity, it's exposure you don't choose. Each extra bit of lead or cadmium may seem harmless in isolation, but over months and years it builds. The worst part, those most vulnerable might never suspect the source. When you wander down the chocolate aisle next time and see Dove Dark, remember this: the flavor may be smooth, but the risk might not be. That wrapper might distract your eyes, but it cannot hide the lab results. The next name we expose makes this pattern even more disturbing. Number 6. Tony's Chocolonely. In early 2025, Tony's made a stunning recall announcement. Certain lots of their dark almond sea salt and everything bars were pulled from shelves because small stones were found embedded in them. Not a rumor, not a partial batch, they recalled 7 lots distributed nationwide across U.S. retail and online, affecting bars sold between February 7th and March 24. That many batches means the quality control failure was not trivial. 12 consumers reported finding these stone fragments, hard, sharp, capable of damaging teeth or injuring internal soft tissues. No injuries confirmed yet, but that doesn't erase the danger. Tony's cited a breakdown in their almond processing supplier chain as the likely source. Stones that should have been filtered out before mixing with chocolate somehow got through multiple quality checks. That recall, classified as Class 2 by the FDA, signals a warning that exposure may lead to medically reversible consequences, at least in theory. But for vulnerable consumers, people with fragile dental work, those with weaker immunity, older adults or children, a fragment as small as 6 millimeters can still break enamel, scratch gums, or lodge in a throat passage. What makes this disturbing is not just the physical hazard. It's how this incident undermines everything Tony's has built. The brand has long marketed itself as a force for good in chocolate ethical sourcing, fair pay, transparency. A recall of this nature erodes that perception. If stones can slip in, what else might slip in unnoticed? Tiny metal fragments, contaminants, heavy metals. The same supply chain loopholes that allowed stones may also allow chemical risks, and the implications ripple outward. Consumers pick Tony's because they believe they are voting with their dollars, choosing ethical chocolate. When that trust fractures, the fallout is not just loss of branding, it's consumer cynicism toward all ethical labels. Corporations count on that cynicism, assuming people won't dig deeper. Policymakers and enforcement agencies too play a role. By relying on voluntary recalls and reactive reporting, the system leaves consumers exposed while delays and loopholes persist. Companies like Tony's receive praise for their mission, but oversight often lags behind marketing. When oversight is weak, ethical branding becomes far more vulnerable to exploitation. The domino effect is real. A recall for stones today can pave the way for contamination tomorrow. Consumers who tolerate a stone risk may become numb to it and overlook heavier risks. This is how trust decays bit by bit. As you look at your chocolate stash tonight, take a close look at your Tony's bars. Check your lot code. If it falls in the recalled range, don't consume it. And start asking deeper questions, not just about fair wages, but about filtration, lab testing, traceability, and supplier accountability. Coming next, our final brand in the list, one you may never expect, hiding risks that exceed the ones we've already laid bare. Number 7, JLM branded dark chocolate nonpareils. A single bite of JLM branded dark chocolate nonpareils can feel like trust in a small artisan brand. But hidden inside recent disclosures lies a risk that many would never expect. In June 2025, the manufacturer issued a nationwide recall of several lot numbers of JLM's dark nonpareils because the product contained undeclared milk. That means people allergic to dairy, often children, seniors, or anyone with sensitivities, could face life-threatening allergic reactions from a candy they thought was dairy-free. The label said nothing. This recall was not about overt toxins or physical contaminants. This was about deception hiding an ingredient that carries risk for many. For someone with dairy allergy, even a few milligrams of milk protein can trigger hives, swelling, breathing difficulty, or worse. Because JLM did not declare, milk consumers had zero warning and no opportunity to refuse. That level of omission is not a mistake, it's a breach of consumer trust. In the recall announcement, The affected lot numbers included codes such as 28202501, A29202501, A23202504, A14202505, A15202505A, and 03202506A. Bars sold under those codes were meant to be removed from circulation and returned for refund. Yet until the recall, many sat on shelves or in people's pantries. That means someone might have taken a bite thinking it was safe only to experience symptoms. What's chilling is how quietly such a recall can be executed. Without the dramatic headlines of a mass poisoning, the public rarely hears about these cases, and so the brand's image remains mostly intact. Customers continue buying, believing small brands are safer precisely because they're niche and so less likely to be compromised. But this assumption becomes false comfort when labeling can hide dangers. From a structural perspective, JLM's lapse reveals weaknesses in regulatory oversight and in the trust framework consumers rely on. All too often, oversight agencies react to consumer reports rather than proactively testing small brands. The budgets and priorities of food safety enforcement do not scale proportionally to risk. A tiny artisan brand might slip through gaps that giants must clear with scrutiny. Moreover, the recall demonstrates how supply chains can conceal risk. If JLM's producers or suppliers mix in ingredients without full disclosure, or if their sourcing components are cross-contaminated via shared equipment, the final product ceases to be predictable. In that uncertainty, consumers without medical training or access to lab tests are left vulnerable. When brands decide what appears on their labels, consumers must trust. And when brands choose omission over transparency, people pay the price unknowingly. For those managing health conditions, allergies, or needing certainty in what they eat, this kind of labeling failure is not small. It is a crack in the foundation of food safety. Each recall like this chips away at our collective faith in brands we consider trustworthy. What begins with dairy omission might lead others to wonder what else is hidden. As you examine your own chocolate stash, especially any JLM bar, check whether it carries one of the lot codes above, and if so, dispose of it immediately or return it to place of purchase. And when picking future chocolates, insist on full ingredient disclosure, batch transparency, and brands willing to prove, not just promise, safety. Up next, we wrap up this list and explore how the combined weight of these 7 brands reveals a system designed to let danger hide in plain sight, and how you can reclaim control of your sweetest indulgences. 7 brands, 7 different ways trust gets shattered, from heavy metals to undeclared allergens, from lawsuits buried in silence to recalls that barely made headlines. What do they all have in common? The illusion of safety, the marketing of purity, the comforting packaging that masks a system where loopholes, negligence, and corporate control decide what ends up in your body. This wasn't just a list of chocolates to avoid. It was a wake-up call, a glimpse into how easy it is for contaminated products to slip past the radar, to land in your pantry, your lunchbox, your child's Halloween bag. Don't let sweetness distract you from the bitterness underneath. Double-check your labels. Look beyond the buzzwords. And when in doubt, walk away. You deserve better than chocolate that gambles with your health.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.